So I found throughout my life that there's really two people who inhabit us at the same time. And oftentimes we hear the inner dialogue that we're constantly being subjected to as our own inner dialogue. And sometimes that dialogue, in fact, most of the time, that dialogue is not on your side, right? We've got these voices that are going, and I call them like the A person and the B person. The A person is who we're becoming, who we want to be, and the B person is who we are and who we are really in our worst times. And crisis can often bring out your B personality. When you're confronted with crisis, I think one of the big things that resonates with successful people is in a crisis, you really try and be your very best. You try and become the person to get through the crisis instead of just lapsing back into fear, reaction, overwhelm. And the folks who I know who are successful are really good at channeling their A person at the time of crisis. You see this with like athletes, for example. Look at Tom Brady. What a great athlete who just pulls through in the moment of crisis. He's down, but he's still going. And many times he's had the come from behind victories. And so the question that you really have to ask yourself is, how do I become that A person all the time or minimize the amount of time that I'm the B person? The first thing you got to do is you really got to like focus on that inner dialogue. I talk to a lot of people about their inner dialogue and that mental image. The inner dialogue is caused by the image you have of yourself. And sometimes you see yourself in a positive light, but most of the time you see yourself in a negative light, negative imagery that was put into you as a kid, lack and limitation, those kinds of things. And so you got to be aware of what the inner dialogue is. And a lot of people don't even know they've got an inner dialogue going all the time. And you're processing information with an inner dialogue. If you don't know what the inner dialogue is, it's the, when I say everyone has one and you heard the, no, that you don't, that's your inner dialogue, because it's going to contradict a lot of things that you're not ready to take on. So you got this inner dialogue that's going, constantly challenging you, especially when you're trying to strive to become the A person, because to become the A person, you've got to get outside your box. You've got to be uncomfortable. It's not comfortable for that B person to grow. So they want to keep you right where you're at, which is homeostasis. It's absolute comfort, and you'll get stuck there. So you want to focus always on the A person. And the way you do that is with visualization, with imagery, with affirmations, and being conscious of the inner dialogue of what's actually going on. So for example, last night, I've reached a certain level of success. I could retire if I wanted to, but I choose to continue to work. I love the work that I do. I love helping people. But last night, I was just exhausted. I was in a negative place. And the more tired I get and the more down I get, if my nutrition is bad, you have to give yourself a break. I was super negative. And so I just went to bed at 8:30 last night. I took a melatonin and a magnesium pill. Didn't even watch TV. I made sure the TV was off because who knows what's going to come into my head watching a movie. And I forced myself into bed. And by 9:30, I was out. I was up at 5 o'clock this morning, really 4:30, 5 o'clock, I started working. I was able to knock out a whole bunch of things early this morning. There's the person who we are. There's the person we're becoming. And we've got to be conscious of that, especially in times of crisis, because I see that a lot of breakout moments happen for entrepreneurs and business people in the moment of crisis. You may be worn down, you may be tired, a crisis will hit you. If you're not prepared to deal with that, you've got to make sure that you stay focused on becoming the best version of yourself and leading your organization or yourself through that challenging time, because that's when real destruction can hit you too. If you are not prepared for that crisis, you revert back into who you were, and all of a sudden you set yourself back a year or 2 years maybe. I started this journey back when I was several $100,000s in debt. In fact, actually, even doing visualizations and all the self-help stuff had got me into a place where I was in significant debt and I had a lot of losses, sleeping on a couch, and just a really awful situation because of a lot of personal crises in my life as well. And I was doing the visualization, I was doing the affirmations, I was doing the, I'm so happy and grateful now that I have over $1 million in income. I was doing this over and over. I carried around little index cards like they tell you. And that didn't work for me. For me, I had a spiritual conversion, which aligned my faith. First of all, I got my faith aligned. But what my faith allowed me to do was to really know what in my life God's promises were for me, because the Bible says that we're supposed to be blessed, to be a blessing. And that kind of flipped the switch inside of me. But what I began to do at that point, visualization is always good when you want to change your inner self-image. But what I have found works for me really effectively is to ask myself questions designed to bring about a new image of myself. You see, because your brain is a question answering machine. Your brain is a problem solving machine. The problem is many times our brains are not given the right instructions to work on the biggest problem we have. And so we end up being drawn to low value problems, like this guy said something to piss me off. I should have said this, and you replay that image over and over again, and you get angry at yourself or angry at them. You fight with your spouse, you play that argument over and over again and try and think of things to come up with, and then you load up your gun for the next argument you're going to have. So your brain is not pulled automatically to the most important problem. It's pulled automatically to the most interesting problem, which many times is the most petty and destructive thing you're dealing with. And so learning to condition your mind to answer the question you wanted to answer, I have found has been my personal biggest change in my life that took me from just $1 million in income to well over 10 and even beyond that. So what do you mean by that, Greg? The question I ask myself now is, what does the CEO of $100 million a year company look like? And when I ask that question, like, what are the things that they do? How do they spend their time? What does their lifestyle look like? What does their body look like? And I ask that question and my brain begins to spit out answers. And so I ask myself that question every day, because right now we're pushing for $100 million in revenue. I'm already starting to ask myself the even farther out question: what does a CEO of a $250 million a year company look like? How do they act? What kind of relationships do they have? So I started asking those questions, because that automatically puts my brain not into a how do I do it, because that's just strategies and tactics. That's hard, but not the hardest thing. The hardest thing is getting yourself into a mental state where you're that guy or that woman who's doing that. And so I ask these questions, and that has become very powerful for me, because I begin to see the things. For example, my eating, my nutrition has completely changed over the last 10 years. I've given up alcohol. I am working to give up caffeine now. I'm down to half the caffeine I usually drink, because I get brain fog when I get caffeine. My sleep schedule is very regulated. I've been working on increasing my hydration. I follow people who are health experts. I train with a trainer 5 days a week at least. And I make sure I try and get an activity. I wear like my Whoop and my Oura Ring, and usually wear an Apple Watch too, because I believe a person who's the CEO of a $100 million company, his health is an extreme priority for him, and his mental state is extreme priority. You stay focused, being the best version of yourself. And the only way to do that, proper sleep, proper nutrition, proper health, and staying focused on those things. Then throughout the day, you can have hyper focus on the business objectives you need to reach. So for me, asking that question has just slingshot me. By the way, I did it when I was going for $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, $25 million, $50 million. I would ask that question, and my brain would go to work on it, and I'd come up with ideas that would help move me to the next level. What's become really difficult, the higher you scale and the bigger you scale, is finding individuals who you can associate with, because I do believe that your net worth is determined by the 5 people you spend the most time with. And it's very difficult to find 5 people who are CEOs of $100 million companies or more who want to spend time with me anyway. They're usually spending time with people who have bigger goals than they have. So that is a very big challenge to rewrite your framework. So what I do is I try and find good people who have good morals and who are really supportive and uplifting, and try and spend my time the most with them. People who are destructive, I got to cut them out of my life. And that's unfortunate, because at the same time, while you're doing that, they're like, you've changed. And it sounds like it's because you're greedy. It's not. You don't want the money. You just don't want their negative attitude in your mind. You want to try and help them as much as you can. But a lot of times people, it's like the old analogy of crabs in a bucket. They try and pull you down. By the way, crabs don't act like that. You see videos of it, but really it's an appropriate example to say that people will try and pull you down. In fact, another example is, how do you build the tallest building in a city? You build a building and then you tear everything else down. That's what can happen. And they don't do it on purpose. They're not bad people. It's just that it threatens people when you become really focused on your success and your ability to give back, and you're doing the things they wish they could do. You've made the decisions to do it. They're maybe not willing to make those sacrifices and decisions because their image isn't there. They may be the B person right now, and that's okay for them. But, don't rain on somebody else's parade if they want more for themselves, their family, and their community to give back to. Don't pull them down. So for me, as far as the social group that I'm around, it is very difficult to find people who are like-minded, who uplift, who maybe share your same values too. That's a tough thing. Because also at that level, not everybody has a good marriage. Not everybody has healthy friends, healthy kids. That's all important. That's all more important than having a great business, is a healthy marriage, healthy relationship with your kids who are on the right track. And so you've got to make sure that's there too before you try and get to that next level for yourself. When you get to a certain level, it becomes more difficult. Daniel Marcos, my business coach, said that he knows someone who's a coach to billionaires. And the biggest question that billionaires have is, who are their real friends? Because on the way to $1 billion, they hired all their friends. And then the relationships become transactional. And so that's one thing that you've got to be careful of, because you could have a lot of friends and you take them on your jet and you go to nice vacations and they'll all be really nice to you, until maybe you have a disagreement. Unfortunately, I've had friends who've worked for me that they get a sense of entitlement to whatever your results are. And then they say, hey, help me out. I need money here. I need money there. Or they give you bills for work they didn't do and things like that. It's all happened. And it's unfortunate. So yeah, I say it's lonely at the top, but the truth is you choose to be at the top. You have to make a decision. So I'm not going to cry about that. I'm just going to try and find more supportive relationships and help support other people. And in the meantime, I'm going to try and give back to people so they can learn the lessons and maybe avoid some of the hardships on that path and some of the disappointments. I'm not crying. Nobody's crying over, oh, poor Greg doesn't have any friends. But what I do want is to be able to find good people that I can give back to through knowledge and wisdom if I can. So that's what I focus on, and maybe not the absence of other people. Michelle Obama, I think she said that as she and Barack Obama, president, climbed their mountain of success, there were break points of the air thinning, so to speak. I think it was Michelle Obama said this, and they just had to let people go because as you get more and more successful, people either they're threatened or they just can't keep up with you. And it's not that you break up with them per se, we just let them go and you relate to them at wherever you find them and you want to be good with them and nice with them, but you spend less time with them than you would spend with them before, maybe when it was okay at whatever their level they're at. But you've got an objective and a goal for your life and a certain goal to give back and help people. It's sometimes hard to get everyone on board with that vision. And there's some people in your life you're going to have to let go. The Bible talks about God the Father giving us, Jesus talks and says to us, what parent would give their child a stone if they're asking for bread? What would give them a serpent if they wanted a fish? And the truth is, money can actually be very damaging if you're not prepared to deal with it. We see this in Hollywood with celebrities, with musicians and athletes who they have tremendous fame and wealth all of a sudden, and then they fall apart because they can't manage it. There is a path that you have to follow with responsibility and growing as a human being and growing spiritually and mental toughness and all those things to be able to handle this amount of wealth. And what happens is if it comes too fast, it can damage you. And that's something where, like with my kids, particularly my oldest daughter, she's 17, she's starting to date now. I want to be very careful who she dates because when she gets to be 25, 26, 27 years old, and they're talking about the family trust and all those things, that can be a problem. It can be. And so those are issues that you want to make sure that the values of the people that they're associating with are the same values that you have. And that's also a challenge. You want to make sure you raise your kids, but also that they understand what your values are, the importance of giving back, but not just giving away. I don't agree with socialism, but I do want to give back to the poor communities that internationally, even where some kids just don't even have a chance. You want to feed the poor. That's what we're commanded to do, actually, biblically. So I want to make sure that happens, but at the same time, be smart about it. One of the most painful times that I've experienced has been when I have people who are friends and they get into a crisis. It could be a financial crisis. It could be a marriage crisis. It could be a health crisis. And usually what happens with me is it's a financial crisis because I'm a person of some means. So they come and the finances become an issue. And when we talk about the A versus the B person, you've got the person who you are in your flesh, and you've got the A person who you're becoming. Many times, Steve Harvey says that money doesn't change somebody's character. It reveals who they really are. In times of crisis, also reveal who people really are. And that's something that can be very painful. I'm very cautious to give somebody the stamp of approval if I haven't seen them come through a crisis, because in the crisis is when they start doing things like manipulation, guilt trip, attacks, other things on their friends, their family, and other things like that. So I just recommend in relationships with people, you have to be very careful to say you feel like you know them until you've seen them through a crisis, because in a crisis is when you see what somebody's really made of and who they really are. You have to be very careful about that and letting them into your inner circle, because in the time of crisis, they could do a lot of damage if they haven't been tested before that. The interesting question is what happens to your friends when they go through a crisis and whether you help them through it or not. And this is a very delicate balance, because if they're in a crisis, it may be a crisis of their own making, actually. This may be something that they've gotten themselves into. And it's very hard. People don't ask for advice. You can't give people advice. When you say help them through it, could you write a check and get them out of the crisis? Maybe. But does that really help them? That just sets them up for a bigger crisis later on. So you've got to be very careful and delicate. If they ask for your help, then obviously I would give somebody help, certainly advice, and be mindful of that. But if the Bible says don't cast your pearls before pigs and dogs. The answer to that is if they take the advice and they see they're trying, then maybe continue to help them. But many times people want to ask for advice. A business guy came to me for advice a few months ago, and I gave him what I think was a great answer. And then he asked like 12 other people and kept asking. And I'm like, at some point, you've got to pick the advice you want to follow and follow it, not just make this into a drama crisis about yourself. If you're in a crisis, be careful who you ask for help. And if you ask for help, the people who you trust their advice, do what they tell you to do, right? Figure out how to make it work. And if you're helping somebody through a crisis, Make sure that you protect yourself. Don't waste a lot of time and energy, because we all want to try and save everybody else around us. And that can ultimately become destructive for us if we don't have the right boundaries and the right fences set up in our lives. You don't have to save everybody, and everybody's not your job to save. Hey, so if you like today's video, share, like, and subscribe.